This is another 28storms.com/cyclone update on developing Cyclone Evan. This is the latest position estimate from the U.S. Joint Typhoon Warning Center. They placed the storm just to the north of Samoa, and the storm is starting to make that bend more toward the west, and it is beginning to accelerate based on the latest trends on satellite imagery. This is certainly good news for interests across American Samoa and Samoa, as these islands have been battered repeatedly for the past couple of days, and they certainly deserve a much-needed break. As of the latest JTWC advisory, maximum sustained winds are still 100 knots, which would make this the equivalent of a Category 3 major hurricane in the Atlantic Ocean if we were going by those standards, and the storm is currently moving toward the west-southwest. Their latest forecast track does show a gradual bend toward the southwest in the very close vicinity of Fiji, and if this track were to verify, many areas in interest down there would be experiencing cyclone force winds, and although they are showing some weakening as the storm begins to approach the country, we would still be talking about a very formidable storm. Interest there should be bracing now for this potential landfall, as we are within 72 hours of landfall. As one would expect, the Fiji Meteorological Service is also paying very close attention to this developing cyclone, and they currently think that the intensity is Category 3 status based on their scale, but you can see that they are forecasting even more strengthening into a Category 4, and they maintain the storm as a Category 4 as it starts to move through the islands of Fiji. In addition, some of their wording in their public outlook is mentioning that there is even the chance that the storm could attain Category 5 status. In just a moment, we're going to review some of the latest model data that has become available within the past 1 to 2 hours, and I will give my opinion as to whether or not I think the forecast tracks that we just saw are valid. But first and foremost, we're going to take a look at some of the most recent satellite imagery. We lost the daytime satellite as we head into the overnight and early morning hours, and you can still see that Evan is a well-defined cyclone, and it looks as though the center of circulation is still just to the north of Samoa, but you get the overall idea that it is starting to drift more so toward the west-southwest, as indicated by the official products from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center and the Fiji Meteorological Service. In terms of the overall structure of the storm, one thing that we are not quite seeing as much is a well-defined center of circulation. We are not seeing any signs of that eye, at least at the current moment, and that could be an indication that the storm has at least weakened just a little bit, but that's not to say that the storm will not go through a few more intensity cycles, and we will probably see more in the way of strengthening as the storm begins to move away from Samoa. The rainbow color infrared also shows some of the more details regarding the structure and intensity of the storm. You can see earlier in the animation that eye-like feature was a little bit better defined, but since then it has become a little more ragged, and this could be the result of a couple things. First and foremost, there are still some higher elevations immediately to the south of the center, and that comes in the form of the mountains of Samoa, and that always has the chance of slightly disrupting the core, as the core is still very close in relation to those mountains. And also this could be at least a slight increase in vertical wind shear and some dry air trying to funnel into the inner core of the storm, but again, this could only be a temporary fixture here, and we are thinking that there is a chance for more intensification within the next 48 hours. This is a vertical wind shear graphic for the Southwest Pacific, courtesy of the University of Wisconsin. Those dark blue colors represent areas of very favorable and light vertical winds, and you can see that the most favorable conditions at the moment are just to the south of where the center of the storm is currently located, and the vertical wind shear values have crept upward just a little bit across the northern semicircle of the storm, and as we turn on the wind shear streamlines, we can see that the favorable upper level ridge that was once centered a little bit better over the storm earlier today is now displaced a little bit more toward the south, and you've got the clockwise flow around that ridge, so right now the cyclone is experiencing 5 to 10 knots of easterly wind shear, and that is helping to disrupt the storm. However, this upper level ridge could easily move a little bit more toward the northwest, back and directly overtop the cyclone, and once and if that happens, we will start to see more intensification once again. This is the latest sea surface temperature graphic for much of the Coral Sea and Southwest Pacific. On the very eastern edge of this graphic is where Fiji is located, and you can see that the 26 degrees Celsius threshold needed for tropical cyclone development extends well to the south of Fiji, and with the storm coming in from the north, that tells you that conditions out ahead of the storm leading up until the possible Fiji landfall are more than favorable for at least steady intensification. Also, as we take a look at the oceanic heat content, this is also another favorable indicator for more development up until the time the storm starts to move south of Fiji and starts to enter cooler waters as it gets picked up by a mid-latitude trough. This map shows several model plots that seem to be in fairly good agreement with the latest official forecast tracks from the Fiji Meteorological Service and the U.S. Joint Typhoon Warning Center, and as you can see, quite a few of them take the storm directly over Fiji, and that is why there is a lot of reason for there to be at least some concern across the nation, and that is why people should be bracing now for this possible storm. But I will also emphasize that sometimes not the most accurate models show up on map plots like this, and a couple of these models are not some of the best ones. As a matter of fact, we have one model that is not shown here, and it's one of the more accurate models, and I'm speaking about the ECMWF, and we're going to take a look at what that model has to say in just a second. But we're going to begin our model analysis with a look at the latest run from the GFS model, which is the American model. And as we fast forward into the 36-hour time frame, we can see the tropical cyclone starting to enter the domain. You can see it sitting off just to the northeast of Fiji. And in terms of the rest of the weather pattern, we see that there's a strengthening ridge over New Zealand, and it extends well to the north of New Zealand, and the flow again around ridges in the southern hemisphere is clockwise. So just to the north of the ridge, we've got easterly flow in the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere, and that is helping to push the storm more toward the west, and that is also another reason why Evan is starting to move away from Samoa at this hour. We also have a very strong upper level low in the Coral Sea situated just to the southwest of New Caledonia. The flow around this upper level low is counterclockwise, so the flow between these two weather systems is going to induce more of a southwest turn as the storm begins to round the western periphery of that ridge. So as we go into 48 hours and then 72 hours, the storm is now beginning to interact with Fiji, and the ridge is also starting to weaken here. So instead of the storm continuing to move westward, it's going to feel the weakness in the ridge, and it's going to start to turn more toward the south. And as we go into day 4 and day 5, it's obvious that the storm is beginning to turn and move into the mid-latitudes while beginning to weaken. However, even though we're very confident about the overall steering idea, there are still a lot of questions that are going to have to be answered over the coming days with regards to some of the track specifics. And we still have a lot of model disagreement, despite what you saw with that plot showing a lot of models showing the same track. This is now a look at the European ECMWF model, and we're looking at the same overall pattern here as we go into 24, 48, and 72 hours. However, one difference between the ECMWF compared to the other models, including the GFS, is that it's maintaining the strength of this ridge a little bit longer, so therefore the turn toward the southwest does not happen quite as quickly. And that would be some good news for Fiji, because although you would still be impacted by the outer edges of the storm, there is the chance that the inner core could avoid the country and stay just to the west. However, this also puts some of the islands of southern Vanuatu in play, because as you can see here as we go into day 4 and day 5, the storm is in somewhat close proximity to those islands as well. So although it's still fairly likely that the main core of the storm will remain to the east of Vanuatu, there is still just enough room for the things to change just a little bit. So even though those official tracks are just to your east, you may still want to keep an eye on the weather, just in the event that those tracks were to deviate a little bit more toward the west. Also, another interesting tidbit that you may be unaware of is that during the northern hemisphere hurricane season across the Atlantic, which just came to an end, one tendency that the GFS model had was to break down ridges like this too quickly, and the GFS solution would also begin to trend a little bit more toward the European idea, which usually had a better overall handle on the pattern. So if you take any of that into consideration, you may come up with the idea that the European solution may be a little bit more accurate this time around, and if that were to be the case, then the GFS along with some of those official tracks may also have to be adjusted just a little bit toward the west. Nothing substantial, but again, this is just enough room for error here that interest in both Fiji and southern Vanuatu should at least keep up with the weather over the coming days. And finally, this is a look at the regional water vapor animation, which gives us a better picture as to what the current steering looks like and you can see the evolution of the pattern already underway. We've got that upper level low that we saw over the Coral Sea, and this is helping to pump the mid to upper level ridging out across the southwest Pacific Ocean, and the storm is currently north of that ridge, so that's the reason why it's moving toward the west, and eventually it's going to find the alleyway between those two weather systems, and it's going to take that turn toward the southwest. When does that turn happen? That's going to be the big question as we go into the 48 to 72 hour forecast period. Does it start to turn directly over Fiji, or does it wait a little bit until it makes that turn, and does it split the gap between the islands? And that would be the most preferable outcome. That way everyone is least impacted by this storm, but we will just have to wait and see on that. So that wraps up the analysis for now, but keep things tuned to 28storms.com/cyclone, where you will not only find more videos like the one that you just watched, but you will find more links to some of the latest satellite imagery and also some of the analysis products that we use to put together this video. Everything that we have in here you can find through our navigation bar available on the left-hand side of the page. And in addition to analysis, we're also posting on our 28 Storms Facebook, and you will see more pictures of some of the damage that has already occurred across Samoa, and we're going to keep this page active with more information as we get it from the Southern Pacific. And we are also on Twitter. Our handle is twitter.com/28storms. So once again, follow both of those channels for more updates throughout the day and overnight.